My name is Nat Wheelwright. I'm at Bowdoin College, and I am talking with Dr. Alan Covich of the University of Georgia, and we're at the 50th anniversary meeting of the ATBC and OTS's 50th birthday party in San Jose, Costa Rica. And I want to just begin by asking Alan if he would tell us how he got interested in tropical ecology.
I think like many undergraduates, I was excited about learning about the tropics, but having grown up in St. Louis, my exposure was mostly through the Missouri Botanical Garden. And they were working on the flora of Panama, and there were a lot of graduate students. Some were my teaching assistants, and I was very frustrated as an undergraduate that I could not get credit or take the graduate course in tropical ecology. So I fought back, and I applied for an NSF grant for undergraduate research. Got $500, which Washington University matched, and I got to go to Darien, Panama in 1963 after my sophomore year, and it changed my life. So I got to see trees that I could not imagine in a forest that just was astounding, and a threat for the Pan American Highway, because we were following what had been the trail to construct the last part of the Pan American Highway through Darien to connect with Colombia. And I was having a hard time imagining what that landscape would look like after a road came through. And of course the road hasn't been built yet, and hopefully it won't be. But in 1963, it looked eminent, and so we were doing what probably today would be called salvage ecology, and doing transects. And I was really impressed with the landscape, but especially the rivers. Our transportation, we flew into Yavisa, we got on big dugout canoes, and went up the Rio Chuquinaqui with Choco Indian guides, stopping at thatch roofs and sampling our way. And the first macrobrachium I ever saw, a freshwater shrimp the size of a lobster, was in the Rio Chico, which is a tributary for the Chuquinaqui, on the end of a spear from Choco, bringing it in for food. And the whole idea of something this big in fresh water, because I had studied Ozark streams and crayfish, they're about this big, and beautiful yellow spots, I just fell in love with macrobrachium. And we've had a relationship that goes now over from Puerto Rico to Yucatan to Costa Rica, because they're like over 90 species and so on and so forth. So even though I started out in botany, and I got very interested in riparian vegetation and various kind of things, I got quite excited about decapods. And I have been studying decapod feeding behavior and ecology ever since. And so it really paid off, I think, in terms of as an undergraduate. But then when I went to graduate school, it was hard to know what exactly to do. That was 1965. And my advisor at that point was Owen Sexton, who was a herpetologist, and he told me to apply to Yale University and work with G.E. Hutchinson. So I did that, and Hutchinson was very interested in lakes, was writing a treatise on limnology, but the word river was very rarely spoken. It was inflow and outflow. And at that point, there really weren't people working on river ecology, at least that I knew of. And so I studied lakes, I studied lake history, did my work in Yucatan. I went from northern Yucatan into Guatemala, into Lake Petén. Saw some beautiful primary forest, or what thought to be primary forest. And so it's been quite exciting. But I think I came away with a strong view that every undergraduate should spend some time in the tropics. So all of my graduate students were forced to spend at least spring break or at least a few months in the tropics. And some of them, like me, fell in love with it and are still working in the tropics, and others never wanted to go back. But that's okay, as long as they got some idea about biodiversity and could see it firsthand, I was happy. And so now, and I'm at this meeting, and a paper we're giving tomorrow in our stream ecology section There's a lot of people now working on tropical rivers and tropical streams. But the paper is a 3-generation paper in the sense that my former student, Todd Krall, and Omar Perez are co-authors. And we're doing long-term studies now. We're in year 24 for long-term studies in the Laquillo experimental forest in Puerto Rico. And that's just been an amazing experience to be able to study a set of drainage basins over a long period of time. And it's been just amazingly great fun and interest, and yet we still don't know everything that we'd like to know. And so I'm looking forward to getting more comparative studies going, especially here in Costa Rica, because now the University of Georgia has a field station in Monteverde at San Luis, and we're in year 12. And so up there, very high elevation, cloud forest, rainforest kind of zonation, comparing it to the life zones in Puerto Rico and trying to see mainland island kind of differences in species diversity as it relates to freshwater food webs is what I'm trying to keep at. It's been great.
When we were talking earlier, you were saying that a lot of tropical biologists got excited about the tropics because of birds and butterflies, what we think of as the more, some people call charismatic megafauna. I'm not sure I've heard people describe a crayfish as a charismatic megafauna, but it sounds that like that hit a curve.
Well, I'm
right
from
note with
Missouri,
you.
and I used to spend my summers canoeing in the Ozarks and swimming in streams. And the Ozark streams are beautiful, as are many now in the southeast where I'm at. And I think that kids, a large number of kids have certainly discovered crayfish. I can't tell you how many people I have talked to who said, oh yes, I remember I used to tie a piece of bacon on a string and go down to the stream and pull it up, and I would have crayfish hanging on to the bait. And indeed, there is a subset of people out there who are not so visually oriented in terms of birds and butterflies. My mother took me to Audubon Society meetings and tried very hard, following her father, my grandfather, to get me interested in birds. And I find birds fascinating because they're beautiful. I saw my first quetzal at Monteverde in the cloud forest after never seeing him in Guatemala or never seeing him anywhere else. So that was just a few years ago. That was like, okay, you know, come full circle from being a little boy being carried off to Audubon Society meetings to actually being able to see things in the wild. And so I think it's exciting that we've been able to maintain enough biodiversity to still inspire this coming generations to keep excited about it and hopefully protect it and study it and understand it and explain it to others. So, you know, as a teacher, I'm finding that just an enormous great deal of fun, but particularly seeing how my students and their students are able to do things so much better, faster with the technology that we have today. And so I'm trying to stay healthy and see how it's all coming out, because it really is interesting.
Well, you look plenty healthy. I think you'll probably make 50 years of your stream study. I'm wagering.
I'm going to do my best, yeah.
So your mother took you took you to these Audubon Society meetings, and developed in you a love of nature starting at what age?
Yep.
How old were you when you?
Probably 6, 7, 8 years old. Her father was a hunter, originally from Germany. My other side of the family from Romania. I think Europeans coming to North America were astounded at the biodiversity that we have. And consequently, I think in those generations of immigrants coming in, they were very excited about the novelty, just as we would be, or I was, going to Borneo. I mean, I had an opportunity to work with some Japanese there. And to me, it was almost like another planet because of the high diversity and different species and the fact that, you know, I'd never seen them before. And I think that for Europeans coming to the New World, must have been just as exciting as it is today to go some new place that you've never seen, and you see similarities but great differences. And I think, you know, Darwin talks about this is it's so important to travel, and I think the whole notion of we're all on some kind of voyage of the Beagle in one way or another, either through family or just good luck. But and I think that's more and more possible for people to do that today because of the fact is that they have more time and they have more ability to see more different kinds of places. And you begin to make these friendships with plants and animals, and you see them in a new neighborhood, and you say, "Oh, I didn't know you lived here," or how did you adapt to make it in terms of this new environment, or look like you're in some place I've never expected to see you before. And so I think it's almost like establishing old friendships when you're talking with people and you see species that you think you know well. As an undergrad, I spent a summer at the Missouri Botanical Gardens Arboretum studying Phytolacca americana. Everywhere I go, I'm fascinated with pokeweed and Phytolacca and how they're similar and how they're different and what the disturbance was that allowed those seeds to germinate. And it happened that in those particular days, the plants were going along the river, the Merrimack River, which I canoed as a youngster. And never in my canoe was I thinking about disturbance and germination and plant-animal interactions. But by the time I got through 4 years of college, I had changed my major 4 times, and I was learning all kinds of things. And I think that was really exciting. So I think we all kind of have a circular route, and that's why I love being able to talk with students today who are just as confused as I was, as a freshman and sophomore, and not knowing what to do or how to do it, but assuring them that if they start some things and finish a few things, one will lead to another, and life will be good, and just maintaining curiosity is probably sufficient to figure it all out.
Well, you mentioned that you were, this is 1963, you were a sophomore when you first went to the tropics, an undergraduate.
Yeah, just finished, yeah.
And then said that you thought it was important for all undergraduates to travel, and many of them should go to the tropics. You did this in 1963, but OTS didn't have an undergraduate program until 1997.
Right.
Why the delay? Should they have started it along with the graduate program?
Well, I would think so. I mean, now I think, the University of Georgia is part of OTS along with 49 other institutions, I guess. And when I was at Washington U, as on a faculty position later, because my first job after coming out of Yale was back where I'd done my undergraduate work. And by then we were part of OTS. And graduate students still had, the upper hand in terms of being able to have more diversity in their courses. But by then, I think a lot of colleges and universities were already seeing the value. And I think to some extent, that was one reason why I moved to Georgia. I mean, I was at Colorado State University, University of Oklahoma prior to moving to Georgia. And I think that Georgia bought this facility here in Monteverde in San Luis 12 years ago, and developing it in part because they couldn't get enough undergraduates through OTS courses. And the idea of making it more available to more students was just what I wanted to hear. And so I thought, okay, finally. Now, it would have been better to start earlier, I guess. On the other hand, I think it's kind of interesting to see how kids find their own solutions to problems. And I urge them to be creative and say, okay, well, if you don't like the curriculum, fix it. We have more flexibility today, I think, in curricular kind of things than we ever did. And indeed, when I went back on the faculty at Washington University, one of the big new things was students could design their own major. And I was on a committee to approve, sort of tailor-made majors of people putting things together in ways that they thought were interestingly interdisciplinary, and then the faculty were supposed to say, well, that might work, and we'll give it a try. But I think the whole notion of biodiversity and hands-on experience and being able to really be immersed in what you're studying is so important. So when I got out of graduate school, one of my goals was to teach at every field station in the country. And I made it to 5. And then the last one was Flathead Lake in Montana, and that was so beautiful, I never wanted to leave. But I think that tropical field stations are just essential. And I think that there are more now. We just spent yesterday morning talking about how do we coordinate those activities. Peter Raven was there in the Monteverde symposium saying, well, we really need now to try to compare programs, pull some things together so that the whole really is emerging as more than the sum of the parts. And of course, that's what ecologists do. But when it comes to program development, it's still a challenge to see how can you be really mutually reinforcing things. And I think OTS has led the way in that, and indeed has been extremely successful. I think, but every program has its limits in terms of capacity, and I think that that's important because you don't want to overwhelm the habitat or overwhelm the interaction with the students. My concern, I guess, is that ecologists really understand carrying capacity. And when we talk about field stations, I think there is an optimal size, having been in a lot of different ones. And I think in terms of how they're organized and how students really feel about being part of a student group, really critical. So I'm quite happy with the diversity of options that students have. My only frustration, I guess, is with the advising and with the information that's out there. And I think we need to do a better job about getting options available to students where they really understand what their choices are and why one might be better a certain time and another time. And so I'm not sure how to do that, but I think that is something that OTS can help with. I think that there are certain hot spots like Monteverde where this can certainly happen. And I think just maybe it's already happening and I'm just unaware of it. But with the web, there's so much there that students do need help, I think, in terms of guidance through there. And I think in terms of our university, the faculty have that responsibility, and I think we do a pretty good job, but we probably need help. And so I think professional organizations, the Ecological Society, Association for Tropical Biology and Conservation, could maybe jump in there and provide a little more guidance to students, more structured options in terms of, okay, you're a sophomore, you know, this might be a good thing to do depending on what you've already done or what you think you want to do next. I don't know. I think some guidance along the way might be the next thing, because from my limited perspective, you know, there were very few options. Now there's so many options. I think the students do have a tougher time.
I'd say you to get an NSF grant as a sophomore, it showed that you had a lot of initiative, but still. Well, let me ask you how you have seen OTS change over the years. You've been involved with OTS for, well, decades.
Well, I think mostly through meetings, Biotropica. I was the editor just dealing with the freshwater ecology papers. And I think that, you know, Biotropica is a fantastic journal. I think the society's done great. I'm just so impressed with 50 years of success. I mean, it's one of the great things about getting old is that you can see these things happen in ways that you wouldn't have imagined. But walking into that room Sunday night and seeing, you know, all those people and hearing the plenaries that we've had and so on and so forth. I mean, you can't come out of this meeting. I mean, even the first day, I was thinking like, wow, how do you top that? You know, and then yesterday, the second day, well, kind of did in some ways. And I think that it's just, the only thing I'm concerned about is living long enough to see, you know, what happens in the next 50 years.
Can I ask if how you have brought experiences from the tropics and from interactions with OTS back to your students back in Georgia? And
well, I still teach Introduction to Ecology. I don't know, it's been 30 or 40 years of that. And I really try to use examples from the tropics every which way I can. What I found is, since so many of our majors are bio majors and so many of them are pre-meds, I try to find some connection with disease ecology, and that's actually pretty easy to do, but really getting into population ecology and concepts and so on. And once you have their attention, then you can sort of get some more diversity into the story. But I think so many of them now are, you know, aware of the tropics that you have to give it some thought as to how to really get them truly engaged, because they think they know it all. And they've seen it all on television and on CDs and in the movies. But sometimes I think that in terms of concepts, I had a student ask me if she could come and help do some field work, and I asked her, well, where have you been before? She said, Ghana, Ecuador. I said, you know, what do you mean by field work? And she said, well, I was, in a course, but I wasn't getting my own data. I wasn't analyzing it. And I'm a math major, and I'm an English major, and I'm a bio major, and I'm thinking about adding ecology. And I said, well, I don't think you need another major, but I think probably some field work where you get your own data would be a good idea. And she's now finished her PhD at UC Santa Barbara and is on a postdoc. And I'm inviting her back to talk to our students as somebody who didn't know what she wanted to do after she had the field experience and felt like she wasn't sure where to go to graduate school. And all that worked out for her. And I think so. What we try to do is bring back alumni as case studies and basically let students know that we all have had these periods of indecision and not knowing what to do, and just jumping in and doing it is usually the answer.
That's great. Let me end with one quick question.
Okay.
If I told you that you had won a raffle at this meeting and you can snap your fingers and go anywhere in Costa Rica for the weekend, where would you go?
Probably back to Monteverde. I think the whole array of habitats there and the elevational gradient is truly impressive. And I think that I'm really excited about its future. And I think the history of people there, the community, the Quakers, the whole cheese factory, the river running through the towns, all the rivers, and we just don't have enough information about what the biodiversity is along that gradient in terms of fresh water. So just like the things that I found very exciting in Darien, Panama the first time, I'm still excited about how they look in the mountains. And those elevational gradients are going to change with climate change. And that water at the cloud forest is pretty cold. And down at the bottom, I don't know how many of those species are going to make it up over those waterfalls or really get. I'm afraid that a lot of aquatic biodiversity is going to be stuck in some real issues in terms of climate change. So I think getting into the mountains and seeing, how are things going to look in 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, at least get some people thinking about it so this next generation is out there getting the measurements, because we don't really know that much about variable temperature in Monteverde in terms of the water. We know the air temperature, but we don't know what the springs are doing. We don't know enough about that hydrologic complexity. So that's where I'd go.
Well, let's hope we learn in the next 50 years.
We better.
Alan, thanks very much.